Hello and welcome to the Hero's Spouse. I'm Kendra Ruth, here to answer one of your questions about marriage and midlife crisis. Today we have an anonymous female left behind and forward-moving spouse with a bomb drop of August 1st, 2023 and a date of marriage of 2002. She has a clinging boomerang who is a low-energy wallower. She says, can you talk about an MLCer who doesn't monster and is kind? He says that we had a great marriage, and he knows that this has nothing to do with me. He cries during every conversation, and he says this is not what a man is supposed to be. He always helps me out if I need him. I only contact if really necessary. What do we do with this guy? He says he can't find his love for me anymore, and he doesn't know what he wants. I never bring up our relationship or our marriage. He texts and cares for our teens, brings treats for our dog, makes appointments for my car problems, fixes house issues, and invites me along to hockey games with he and the kids. He's been living in a basement suite for a year. He hasn't told anyone what he's done. He's put his business incredibly in debt, and he never speaks of it. Help. Well, first thing, yeah, this is what a low energy wallower is. Okay. And sure, there's a spectrum of low energy wallowers. You're dealing with a classic depression. And let's just set midlife crisis aside and let's just look at depression then. Unfortunately, in your depression situation, your husband left. But this is depression. This is clinical depression and shame. So maybe his shame is because he's depressed and he's not acknowledging the depression, because perhaps depression is a weakness, because this isn't what a man is supposed to be. He cries. He's crying all the time. He's feeling that he's weak. He's feeling he's not living up. He's feeling he's not taking care of his family, even though he's coming back to do things, but he left you. He left. He's feeling he's not worthy, and you're not. He's not worthy of you. So he doesn't deserve you, or you're better off without him. So he comes back to help, but you're better off. You're better off without him. And you're not. I'm not saying that he's feeling it, and he may have said it to you. He can't find his love. When you are depressed, your emotions are muted. Your emotions are buried. Those feelings, you're numb. So you can't find much of anything. Sometimes when you're depressed, you can find anger. Some people who are depressed will feel their anger. If you're a high energy replayer, it's a masked depression, because they do show the energy that we think of. We think of depression as a low energy. And so that's what we call it, masked or covert. And they seethe with anger. But we can have low energy where you can tell they're depressed, but they are seething. It's this dark, boiling energy, but you can feel it. But he's kind. He knows it's him. It's just that he thinks he's weak and undeserving and unworthy. He thinks it's about who he is inside. He thinks it's about his character. And or he has a stigma of mental illness. Depression is a type of mental illness. Or let's just call it, depression is an illness. Mental illness is an illness. It's just a medical illness. And it affects our behaviors. And if you had a brain tumor and it was pressing on things in your brain, it would change your behaviors, but we would really understand that was medical. When it's a depression, we don't get it. We don't accept that as well. So maybe it's a stigma of that as well. So he hasn't told anyone what he's done. That's one of the really indicators of shame for me. He doesn't want people to know. He's embarrassed. but bigger than that, he's ashamed. So there's a few resources. Of course, midlife crisis is an important resource, but I want you to look at some of the other resources. One of them is I want you to go to Storied Mind and read the John Folk Williams resources. So Storied Mind is a website. If you just key in Storied Mind, and I will try and put the link down here below the description in the video to the Storied Mind website, and read some of those resources and read some books on depression. So I'm going to stop the video for a moment and go over to my bookshelf and pull some of the books over and bring them. Okay. Okay. I have a few books here that I'm going to recommend. And just so you know, so much of my research was back in the day. So these are not new books. I'm sure there's other new ones out there as well. The first one is by Emmy and Philip Aronson, and it is mostly by Emmy. And it is about Emmy's experience with Philip's depression. It is not a midlife crisis book. This is a memoir. And he went through a clinical depression that was a few years long. And in their experience, the way she describes it, it was a debilitating disease. As I recall from reading it, it seems like he wasn't able to work. He had to be watched all the time. And this was a limited period in their lives where he had not been depressed before. He was not. Some people have cyclical periods of depression. This was not the case here. But during this period, he at least once attempted suicide because it was so bad that he was afraid he was never going to be able to get out of it. And it started with a medical issue, that he was just having a medical issue that he couldn't figure out, and it was so painful. And in this case, he has a twin brother who had had a similar episode many years before in the brother's 20s. So next, I don't recall this book so much, so it was just one on my shelf. Talking to Depression, Simple Ways to Connect When Someone in Your Life is Depressed by Claudia Strauss. So just a resource. Now, the next two are, this one is a very small book. It's been many years since I've looked at it, but this is by William Styron, Pulitzer Prize winning author, author of Sophie's Choice. Darkness Visible, and this is his memoir, a memoir of madness, he calls it, his memoir of his depression. And it is short, but it is 84 pages, and it's a beautiful book. So that's a highly recommended one. But the next one is not short. This one won the National Book Award, and another, not memoir of depression, memoir research tome, big giant book, but it's amazing. Indexed. But this is another, not a scientist, but a writer. The Noonday Demon, an Atlas of Depression by Andrew Solomon. This book is amazing. And it looks like scary to read it. But I remember when I opened the first page, first chapter, I was, from the first line, I can see why this won the award. So I am going to read you, because I have, you can see, it is highlighted. So I'm going to read you at least the first highlighted portion, possibly the first paragraph, because the end of that first paragraph is also highlighted. To understand what your MLCer in his classic depression that he's feeling is going through, and what other MLCers that are low energy wallowers specifically, or especially, may be going through for others that are listening, okay? And this first chapter is called Depression. Depression is the flaw in love. To be creatures who love, we must be creatures who can despair at what we lose. And depression is the mechanism of that despair. When it comes, it degrades oneself and ultimately eclipses the capacity to give or receive affection. It is the aloneness within us made manifest, and it destroys not only connection to others, but also the ability to be peacefully alone with oneself. Love, though it is not prophylactic against depression, is what cushions the mind and protects it from itself. Then I'm going to skip down to the last piece, which I also have highlighted. In depression, the meaninglessness of every enterprise and every emotion, the meaninglessness of life itself, becomes self-evident. The only feeling left in this loveless state is insignificance. That's the point. That's how they feel. What is the point of this life? There is no point. Or maybe it's just there's no point in my life. Maybe there's a point in all of your lives, but mine, it's pointless. And he's a writer. And so, though the book goes through research and all sorts of areas, it was extremely helpful for me. Because he also has a beauty in his prose. So it actually was quite ironically an easy read for such a long book, because before I got to, it was over 400 pages before we got to the bibliography. Of course, I'm a reader. So, he also has, before you get to chapter 1, there's a note on the method. So, but this may be, I usually recommend, just for your memoirs, I recommend Emmy and Philip Aronson, because they're the ones that are a couple that have gone through. I recommend this one, just, it has so many insights on the experience. Okay, because he's going through a classic depression. And when we are trying to put a lens of midlife crisis across it, we sometimes focus so much on that we forget, what do I do with this guy? What's going on? Well, what's going on is depression. And midlife crisis is depression, but when it's a high energy, especially, that's the focus. It's high energy. And there are so many other things going on with it, because we don't think of that are part of depression, but we don't think of them, like infidelity, depression's dirty secret. You're dealing with classic depression. And I would really like it if he could get some help for that. And if he's in denial about it, he may not. So your job is to be empathetic. You are there for him. You're not there to enable him. So go through the books and see. I know there's one book I had somewhere on one of my shelves that at what point had a list on the things. It had just a basic list. What to say, phrases, what not to say. And it was years ago. It was probably more than 15 years ago that I read that list. But it was, and I don't think it's this one. But things that are just, because you don't want to enable. I know I'm jumping around. You don't want to enable, but you want to be there. And there can be this delicate balance. What can you do? And then there might be times where you have to, I didn't do too much, but if I continue to do the same thing I have been doing, which has been the right step, but if I keep doing it, then it will be too much. Because sometimes this is right, and then but next week it's enabling. And that can be confusing. Okay, so what do you do with this guy? You understand that what he's experiencing is depression. You reassure him that he has been a wonderful father. He has been a wonderful husband, and you recognize and understand that he is struggling. And you love him, and you were there for him, and you practice listening skills. And you show him that you believe in him. You show him empathy. You also show him firmness. You show him the boundary of you will do this. In other words, you aren't going to let things go. In other words, I'm pointing out his business incredibly in debt, and he doesn't speak about it. Is his business going in debt affecting you and your debt? Are you allowing your personal finances to go and be squandered because of that? Because you might have to do something about that so that you don't lose everything. And so where do you have to take back some power, even from him, to save? You're not saving him. He might get saved, as part of it. I mean, like finances, but because you have to save yourself, you have to save your finances, save it for your kids and you. And, it's just a bonus for him that it doesn't get his retirement doesn't go crashing because you stepped in, because it's also yours. So you have to figure out where you have to do that and where you have to say, okay, I have to let him go. I have to let him fall. I have to let him fail at some of these things or crash. And when do I step in? And it's going to be hard. And you can go to counseling. Even if you're just going for, this is hard on me and I just need somebody to talk to about this. And I am the distant, somewhat caregiver or partner of somebody who is depressed, severely depressed, so depressed that he had to leave. And it's not because I made him leave, but he left because of his shame and his fears. So that's where I want you to really focus your research, okay? Because I know before you're like, is he in limerence because of this? And is he no longer in replay? No, it sounds more like this is a depression thing. It's just, and these low energy guys, when it's a depression, he's very nice. It's very sweet. I love that he's doing all of these things. I love that. It's beautiful. It helps him, and he needs that. Sometimes some people have said, the only reason I kept going was I had that plant and it needed watering, or I had the kitten. I had the kids to feed, thank goodness. But even a plant. So he's coming and he's taking care of the kids and he's doing things with you. Good. Even though he's Debbie Downer. Okay. So just focus on that as depression, and I will try and get that story of mine link for you. Okay. I hope this is helpful, and I will see everybody in the next question.